In the Costa Rica real estate world, the term eco-community or sustainable community is thrown around very often. You see it in a ton of marketing out there, and very much as part of how a lot of developers try to promote their projects. Tonight, I want to help empower you to understand the difference between the greenwashing that a lot of developers in Costa Rica do to promote their projects and actual ecologically friendly development, or at least projects where you can see that there's been a commitment to protecting the local environment and doing as much as possible to preserve it. Thank you very much for joining me tonight. My name is Matt Rosensteel, broadcasting live from Playa Junquillal in Guanacaste, Costa Rica. I very much appreciate you joining me once again for our live Costa Rica chats with Costa Rica Matt. If you haven't watched before, then please note that we're here live every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Costa Rica time, or sometimes just a bit after that, with all kinds of Costa Rica real estate information that is intended 100% to help empower people who are considering moving to Costa Rica in an effort to help you be a better Costa Rica real estate customer, or to help you figure out that perhaps Costa Rica isn't the right place for you. If you're considering moving to Costa Rica, if you've been here and now you're thinking about investing here, please don't hesitate to send me an email to matt@lat10realty.com. I'd be more than happy to help you navigate the Costa Rica real estate market. Again, tonight our topic is Costa Rica eco communities. And when I created the thumbnail for the episode tonight, I definitely stressed the eco in both quote marks and italics, because it's a term, a three-letter word that you see so frequently in Costa Rica that I'm afraid to say it's lost significant meaning. And when you look at something online and you see ecological community, green community, environmentally friendly, all of these terms in Costa Rica real estate can mean very different things depending on what kind of project you're looking at. Tonight, I want to start out by looking first at those terms you might see to try and give you an understanding of what they might mean, if anything. Second, I want to talk about, once you found a project, whether you can see if that project has a truly ecological design, if they laid it out and tried to set up the project, a development, a community here in Costa Rica, so that it's actually environmentally friendly. Next, I want to talk about some of the simple infrastructure features that you can look for in a gated community here in Costa Rica if you hope to find a project that is more ecologically friendly. And finally, I want to wrap up by talking about both the forest protection that you can see some communities do here and their community participation efforts to help you gauge just how committed a developer or a community here in Costa Rica is to their eco image, or that green promotion that they're doing of themselves. Again, my name is Matt Rosensteel, broadcasting live here from Playa Junquillal. My experience is based entirely on living in Guanacaste, Costa Rica, the northwestern province, and I realize that this is a very diverse country, and what I say tonight might not be relevant for everywhere in the country, and there are absolutely different places, exceptions, and a lot of nuance. But keep in mind, what I'm trying to do is provide practical, straightforward advice based on my experience living here in Guanacaste since 2008. If you haven't already done so, I would greatly appreciate it if you'd click that subscribe button. Also hit the notifications bell so that you know when there's another amazing video up about Costa Rica real estate and moving to Guanacaste. I really appreciate you joining me once again. Thank you and stay tuned. Good evening. Tonight we're talking about Costa Rica eco news, or eco communities rather. You see gated communities all over the country that are promoted as environmentally friendly, eco communities, sustainable living. All of these phrases are bounced around in the Costa Rica real estate market to try and help convince customers that a community jives with Costa Rica's national image of being very environmentally friendly. I don't want to be too negative tonight. My purpose isn't at all to just criticize developments out there. Instead, I have a very positive intent of helping you understand what that messaging might mean, whether it means anything at all or it's significant to you, and how you can navigate different developers out there, and whether or not they're actually committed to those environmental principles. And right away, absolutely, Amy, I agree. We're going to talk about some sketchy marketing tonight. And I want to mention, if you have any questions, feel free to post them in the comments, whether this is you're watching this live or on a replay, because every last Wednesday night Costa Rica chat of the month, I will recap questions that I've gotten from my absolutely massive audience over the past month. And I'll try to answer any questions that I haven't been able to cover during my previous broadcasts in the month. Before I get to the Costa Rica eco community discussion, I did want to mention we have some very important art and sports news from the homestead tonight. Most importantly, both my boys, Jonas and Daniel, who are now 7 and 4, have recently taken inspiration from the music world. And we can see very much, here's a drawing done by Jonas, who is now aspiring to rock out on his guitar. You can see the great progress he's making in drawing and really capturing the moment of somebody absolutely rocking out. And second of all, we can see that Daniel, our 4-year-old, is ready to accompany Jonas on the keys. Here, he drew himself on a stage with lighting, notice, absolutely rocking out on a keyboard. Next in sports news, I'm happy to report that my family has become obsessed with pickleball. And to go to a very accurate depiction of how much we're enjoying ourselves, we have another drawing done by Daniel here. Oh, gotta get it out of the way of the logo there, where you can see the 4 of us having a great time on the pickleball court with those pickleballs whizzing through the air. Thanks very much to Jonas and Daniel for capturing what's really important in life and what we're doing. To move on and begin with our discussion of Costa Rica eco. Oh, first, I forgot to play. Here is some evidence of just how well we're doing at pickleball right now. You'll see Jonas in this video absolutely destroying it on the court. He's got quite a forehand. Daniel is still learning the nuances of the game and doesn't necessarily participate as much. But here we are in our favorite local pickleball court, Jonas tearing it up on the right there, myself sweating my buns off trying to keep up with him. And anyway, that's what's happening on the family front. Interestingly, that tennis court is at one of Costa Rica and Guanacaste's premier ecological gated communities. And my intent tonight is to talk specifically about what an ecological community in Costa Rica can be. Let's start off by talking about some terms you'll frequently see out there on the Costa Rica real estate websites describing different gated communities and their plan for development. You see one of the most abused terms in Costa Rica is sustainable development. And in fact, when I joined Peace Corps in 2008, the government here was very much promoting this idea that they had found through ecotourism and a conservation-oriented model of development that they would be able to grow their economy in a sustainable development. That became a key phrase that a lot of developers and gated communities latched onto. Over the years, you've seen it in global development work. And what I want to tell everybody tonight and, discuss a bit is the honest fact that the development of our natural resources and turning them into gated communities, turning them into housing developments, etc., can absolutely never be sustainable given the fact that the materials we use are all finite on this planet, on and on and on. The simple act of changing land into homes is always going to be unsustainable if we're looking at the global planetary scale. So if you see the term sustainable, immediately you might start to question a developer, a community, etc., as something that really didn't have a better word to describe what they're attempting, because it can be just one of those easy catchphrases that a lot of developers out there sort of latch onto. One thing, for example, I'd like to show you on my screen here, one community that says it is a sustainable community. And this is a place, again, I don't mean to just criticize. This is a place that makes a lot of people happy. I'm not going to mention the specific development or what's going on there, but I just want to point out the fact that on their website, they purport to be a sustainable community. And when you look at what's actually happening in this development, you would see aggressive terracing going up a very steep slope in almost every direction. And you'd see large numbers of luxury homes built with ocean views. You see relatively high density housing with all kinds of pools. You see a number of things that we'll discuss further tonight that are definitely not sustainable. And the fact that somebody might use that term to describe that kind of development in this area is just evidence of how meaningless some of these terms can be when they're used as marketing concepts. Another absolutely meaningless term, or rather a term that's been rendered meaningless by its abuse, is the word eco. And, frankly, I've seen a septic tank company called Eco Tank in Costa Rica. You see Eco Resort at a place where they've done absolutely nothing to try and preserve the local environment, and rather they're just situated in a friendly, forested, nice remote beach feeling kind of situation. And that sort of term comes into play. Whenever you're looking at Costa Rica real estate, really, if I saw any kind of developer using the terms either sustainable or eco, I would be very skeptical as to whether or not there was anything backing that up. And what I want to help you do is understand some of the ways that you can verify if they're actually coming through on that concept. Um, and before I go on, I want to mention that there are some incredible places in Costa Rica that are the exception to what I'm talking about. They're developments or farms or specific projects that have an insanely pure commitment to being environmentally friendly or to being an eco hotel or whatever. And they're actually doing some amazing work in that regard. One of the projects that I would mention, there's Finca Luna Nueva, a small boutique hotel with a restaurant started by a friend, somebody I've known from a long time ago, where they put in acres and acres of permacultured gardens to supply their restaurant, a hotel that has very low consumption. Everything is absolutely focused on this concept of being environmentally friendly. Another project, Rancho Mastatal. You see these places in Costa Rica where very dedicated professionals and people who care about the earth have carried out a truly eco concept. It does exist here, and you shouldn't just assume that everywhere in Costa Rica is greenwashing, but I would cite these couple of examples and who knows, a dozen, 2 dozen more throughout the country as the absolute exception to the rule. And very frequently, when you see these terms applied, let's say 75, 80, 90% of the time, these terms are being abused by the marketing programs that are using them. So let's talk about the specifics a bit. And if you're looking at a community that claims to be ecological or really eco-friendly, how can you look at the community design and decide whether or not they've tried to abide by those principles whatsoever? First and foremost, if you are a novice observer of this, you can look for soil erosion wherever you see it. And the more erosion that you notice, very easily you can tell that people have not committed to that principle of ecological friendliness, because it's a simple indicator of whether the development happened and eliminated the natural resistance of the ecosystem to that same erosion. I guarantee you, if you just start watching out for gullies in the soil, if you look at the roads in a community, if you look at the lots that have been cut, and you see evidence that the soil is washing away, or rather that it's, just being taken out of the community, that's your absolute clearest and easiest indicator as to whether that developer gave a real hoot about actually abiding by those ecological principles. Steve, your question is terrific. You're asking about Tierra Pacifica, a gated community that's right next door to me. And one of the things that I would bring up specifically about Tierra Pacifica next door is that it's a community where an enormous amount of investment was put in to controlling soil erosion when they did their development. Driving through the community, you see retaining walls. You see that where water runs across the road, they installed above ground culverts, this sort of pass-through system. And specifically, they focused on not allowing soil erosion to happen which may not really catch that sexy image and be the most fascinating thing to promote out there. But if you drive through a million other communities in Guanacaste, you'll see roads just cut up into the hills with bare soil walls and this gullying happening everywhere where it's clear that the soil is just being allowed to run away through erosion. And that to me is one of the easiest ways to just pick out whether or not a development is happening with any interest in protecting the environment. We could go back thousands of years and talk about soil erosion more. I very much know that it's not the most interesting topic, but if you see it, if it's happening a lot in the community that you're investigating as a Costa Rica real estate client, you can pretty much assume that that eco term might be a whole lot of hogwash or whatever you want to call it. Another easy indicator as to whether or not a community is actually ecological or sustainable is the slope of the roads. And communities that are planned with a lot of respect for the local ecosystem don't involve roads that go straight up to ocean views on a steep angle. For a ton of reasons, that's bad for the local environment. You're creating runoff, and very much you're going contrary to the nature of how a mountainside would prefer to exist. If you see roads that are ultra steep in a development, really it's a clear indicator that the developer was more interested in taking advantage of those particularly good views at the top of the hill than they were in trying to preserve the natural harmony of the surrounding ecosystem. Honestly, there's so many people looking for real estate that has that view and they want to see the ocean that I understand exactly why developers do this. There's a profit motive. There are, reasons that are very clear on paper. What kind of gets on my nerves is when developers build those roads straight up the mountain, going contrary to the entire ecosystem around it. And then they slap on their community the term eco-community or environmentally friendly, when really all they were focused on was profit and views to begin with. To go on to another thing about community design, I wanted to mention this whole concept of density within a development, and you'll see that a lot of communities that brag about their environmental friendliness, the ecological concept, also brag about the fact that, all of our lots within the community are at least 5,000 square meters. We have an acre and a quarter for each home, which allows for a lot of space between each home. It's wonderful that they did that. And obviously, there's a huge environmental benefit when you space out homes, allow more forest canopy between them, and when you don't have so many people living in a single place. That's all good. But when you see a Costa Rica developer bragging about this, you need to understand that Costa Rica's land subdivision laws made it far more convenient for them to go to that 1.25 acre size because of the way they wanted to segregate their community. You see these projects out there where they say everybody has an acre and a quarter, and that's, they're really proud about the fact that that makes them ecological or really responsible. We're spreading people out over a large area and allowing that forest in between them. But very often, the only reason that the developer did that in the first place was because it saved legal costs up front. And I'm sorry to be so cynical there, but it's the darn truth. 5,000 square meter lots in Guanacaste are allowed to be subdivided from a farm under a different system than if you want to create very tiny, individual half acre, eighth acre, etc. lots. And so a ton of communities get off the hook saying we're ecological because we have people spread out, when in fact, their only motive was the fact that it was easier to subdivide under that law. So again, if you see these people bragging about that and this being a real, demonstration of commitment by the developer to maintain that ecological concept, really, you should take it with a grain of salt here in Guanacaste that it was just easier for them to develop under that paradigm than it was for them to set up smaller lots through what would be called a condominium legally. Let's move on to talk specifically about infrastructure within communities and how that can be ecological. One of the most important and easy things that Costa Rica developments can do to have a lower impact on the surrounding ecosystem is through underground electrical infrastructure. You wouldn't realize it, but when you have electric cables running through the air, you have to separate a large swath of the canopy in order not to have trees overgrowing those lines in either direction. Really, it creates a break in the forest. It's problematic for a few reasons. Primarily, the howler monkeys or white-faced capuchin monkeys, if you're down in southern Costa Rica, can't get between different areas of their habitat, or what they would hope would be their habitat, if there are power lines running up above the road. Lots of places, there's a great organization, Salvémonos, that has been pushing for electric lines not to shock monkeys. A lot of people are focused on the fact that these cables and the transformers and everything involved with electrical infrastructure above ground can kill animals. But in addition to that concept, really what you're creating is a large corridor between the connectivity of the forest that, beyond monkeys, also affects the movement of birds. It definitely changes the forest composition. And if developers are truly committed to an ecological concept, one of the easiest ways that they can help the forest in our area and help the wildlife is by putting in underground electrical infrastructure. We also talked a bit about roads. And one of the things I mentioned was maintaining those roads along the contours of the land. Instead of going straight up 90-degree slopes, that's exaggerating, but instead of cutting the landscape this way, a truly ecological development would have as little impact on the land as possible by having roads that follow the natural contours of the hills with flat roads. Another easy concept to look for when you're driving around your future Costa Rica community is what the road cuts, or rather, what improvements the developer has done to those road cuts to ensure that they don't turn into eroded messes. It's easy for any developer just to cut roads in Guanacaste, and 9 times out of 10, what development you're looking at could just have those roads cut up into the hillsides. If there is no retaining wall infrastructure, if there's no drainage that's reinforced with concrete, if those roads have pretty much been left as dirt cuts up into the hills, that is a huge, huge problem for the ecosystem. Those roads create drainage. They dry out whatever system they're in. The soil that will run off the roads is going to choke up local creeks. They're going to kill all kinds of animals that are burrowed beneath creek beds in the dry season here in Guanacaste. And if you see that a developer just hasn't done anything to keep those roads from eroding entirely, then really it's a development where they didn't put in the necessary work to actually fulfill any kind of eco concept. And to repeat, you will see a ton of places in Guanacaste specifically where developers have cut roads without following up with any kind of infrastructure to hold those up. And really, you're just driving around on bare dirt roads with the wall of the cut entirely vulnerable to soil erosion, which is a huge deal in a country where we see such a dramatic rainy season. In October, we get torrential rains at times. And if a developer has simply cut a road and left it to go on, then absolutely you'll see that road start to gully and all kinds of erosion coming out of it during the rainy season. Before I go on, I'm going to take a quick break out there. Quick reminder, if you've got questions that you'd like me to answer in the last live Costa Rica chat of the month, which will be next Wednesday, May 25th, be sure to post them in the comment section now if you're watching live, or if you're watching a replay, feel free to post it as well. Con permiso, as they would say here. To go on, one of the pictures, and I was trying to remember a picture that I wanted to show. There are a lot of ecological communities that start off with a very good intent and a lot of good things done by the developer. So I don't want to just harp on them and point blame at them specifically. There's a big difference here between these communities with agricultural development paradigms and condominiums, in that in certain communities, really there are no rules over what the owners can do to their property after they've acquired it. And if you're really focused on investing in an ecologically sound community, it's worth noting that a lot of gated private projects in Guanacaste, Costa Rica, really don't have any control when push comes to shove legally over what happens on the lots once they're acquired. I bought into a community called Pueblo Verde with absolutely this ecological vision. It's a place where the developers put a ton of effort into erosion control. They designed the community so that the roads follow the land contours. They didn't take advantage of those high ocean views. And they laid everything out very much to show respect for the ecosystem. But down the line, because we're not a legal registered condominium, we really can't enforce those principles of our eco community aside from asking our neighbors, sometimes passionately and trying to do so, pleading to actually come through on that. I have neighbors that have utterly ignored the ecological principles that my community was based on, and their lot is an absolute eroded disaster in this moment. They've flooded out a neighbor. They've clogged up the local water drainage with all kinds of sediment. And all we can do is plead that they remediate all of the damage that they've done. So another element to consider if you're trying to get into a truly ecological gated community in Costa Rica is whether or not they're going to be able to enforce those principles, whatever ideals they had starting out, down the long run, in the long term, based on the legal structure of the community. Sometime, and I'm sure I've covered it before in my videos, I'll go over that difference between agricultural communities and condominiums. But the long story short is that in the kind of neighborhood I'm living in, we can't legally enforce some of the ideal principles that we originally set out with. And instead, we really just have to plead with our neighbors and expect them to do better. Although at this point, so many years of them being so utterly destructive would lead us to believe that's just a pretty futile effort. Going on, I want to talk about forest protection here in Costa Rica as an element of community development. You'll see a lot of developments brag about the fact that they protected X acres, or that they've got, a certain space forested within the community that is always going to remain forest. First of all, you need to check into and understand whether that forest is legally protected in perpetuity, or whether it's just a developer promising that that is going to remain forest. Because very often you will see developers point to a swath of greenery and say, oh no, this is going to remain forest. And then 5 years down the road, once they've sold all of their developed property, and that forest is the last land that they own in Costa Rica, they might very easily decide to add more lots to the community if it's not one of those legal condominiums that I was speaking of, where you have absolute legal control. Another point I want to make is that not all forest and not all protected areas are the same. Everyone wants to believe in their heart of hearts that a tree is a tree is a tree, and we should save every single living tree on Earth. But what you need to understand is that a tree located next to a creek is far more valuable ecologically than, let's go back and reframe that. A native species, old growth tree is far more important than a reforestation tree that was planted at the very top of a hill that isn't even a native species. And you may see developers in Costa Rica pointing to forest preserves. They may be completely fooling you as to whether that it's actual forest or whether that preserve actually matters when it comes to its ecological importance. They may rope off acreages of what turns out to be a teak farm. Teak is a species from Asia that was imported to Guanacaste as a lumber crop that people could plant in monoculture plantations. And if you're looking at a development and they say, oh, this is, protected forest and we've got this amazing green zone, it would behoove you, if you're somebody who cares about this kind of thing, to get a better understanding of what purpose that forest serves, what species are involved, and really if it's the land that is worth protecting. You would hope to see that developers have protected land that is the greatest slope. That steep land really needs to be forest here in Guanacaste, because we have horrible, the drying out of the ecosystem in half of the year means that you need as much water absorption on those steep hills during the rainy season as possible. In addition to preserving that sloped land, you would hope that a developer would really rope off and protect the forest that is closest to waterways. And you would hope that they protect the forest that is really the oldest that they have access to. Primary forest in Central America largely doesn't exist anymore. That real true forest that was here thousands of years ago has been changed and modified, and now it's really hard to come across. Generally speaking, you should be looking for a developer who isn't protecting that new teak plantation, but instead the area of the property that was that intact forest when they purchased. Here I want to bring up another element that's, when people are talking about ecological communities and their efforts to reforest, it's important to understand where this project fits in history and whether it was deforested when the developers purchased it. I want to give a big shout out to Ray Baizi in our area, who owns Pura Jungla, a gated community in our area. It's informally gated and kind of a good mix between, private, but also not too many rules. And he bought a cattle pasture. Tierra Pacifica is another example. Land that was severely degraded and had almost no forest on it 30, 40 years ago. And Ray has overseen the regeneration of his farm back to forest now. So you might look at, he's cutting ocean view lots and, making roads to take advantage of that. But at the same time, where he is in history, he's incredibly validated as an ecological community because he took a piece of land that was scrub and, short-rooted grasses, compacted soils, and all of the problems that come with a cattle ranch. And he's recuperated an incredible amount of forest. I think he has 200 or 250 acres up there. So you might see a community where, there's environmental damage that is happening or has happened here. But it might be interesting to talk to that developer and find out about the back history of the parcel. In the context of where it was 40, 60, 80 years ago, that might be the most ecologically sound and really great advance for the land in terms of protecting the environment, even if what you're looking at is development. And one of the debates I'm frequently in on, in YouTube comments with different viewers, Guanacaste is a region currently being exploited for all kinds of tourism development, gated communities, etc. But in a broader context, a lot of these places that are now being cleared out, or rather where home sites are being leveled and you're getting, openings in the forest, 60 years ago, they may have been in far worse condition. And in fact, the current land use is a better impact on the surrounding ecosystem. So there's also that broader picture to understand. And whenever one just wants to point fingers and say, no, a luxury mansion shouldn't go up there, well, there are situations where that luxury mansion is being built on 30 acres that previously were used as absolutely intensive cattle ranch. And yeah, that mansion up there has a huge ecological impact, but they've reforested below their infinity pool. They've surrounded themselves with all kinds of privacy hedges that follow contours and absorb rainwater. And maybe they've replanted all kinds of species that they want to see in the forest, whereas a while back, it was just cows, grass, and a couple tree species that the rancher used to use as part of their system. So that's part of very much the broader context. Finally, I wanted to talk about ecological communities, community participation, and how they support local organizations. If you want a very easy way to judge developers and whether or not they actually care about the local environment, you can look at the kinds of charitable contributions they're making to community organizations in the area. I think it's great that lots of developers make small annual contributions to community organizations that fit their public relations image well. I think it's great that they always want to publish smiling photos with, we're giving scholarships, we're doing, all of these positive things for the community. But an ecological developer who really wants to come through on their word, respect the ecosystem, and fight to preserve it should be heavily donating to organizations that do good work to protect the local natural resources. And in fact, you see developers who understand the concept where if I protect these natural resources and I strengthen X, Y, and Z environmental organization in our community, they understand that in the long run, not only will the community benefit from those natural resources, but the ecotourism, the positive image that they develop on a broader scale will have a bigger impact than if they just slap their eco label on the community and then try and make every single dime that they can from their real estate. Frankly, I would love to see in every community where you have a sustainable gated community that sustainable developer is donating a large percentage of their profits to a local NGO that is operating strictly to preserve natural resources with no holds barred. I would love to see developers who throw their genuine weight behind efforts to rope off, delineate, and protect the mangroves and critical riparian areas in Guanacaste. I'd love to see developers who focus on preserving the natural beauty of beaches, not through their cleanup guys going through and picking up trash, but rather by financing an organization that is passionately fighting against any violation of the maritime zone whatsoever. And really, when you look at what developers do in Guanacaste, you see a vast range of how they follow through on their ecological commitment. You do see some who are willing to follow that ideal through and actually try to promote the protection and conservation of natural resources in the area. And you see others who commit environmental atrocities and then try and give away food baskets to the local community or a few scholarships, or let's say open up an organic garden rather than really supporting what the local ecosystem needs, and that is, people fighting for it 100%. With that, folks, I'm happy to wrap this one up. It's been a pleasure as always. If you want to look at moving to Costa Rica, if you're visiting our area near and around Tamarindo, do be sure to send me an email to matt@lat10realty.com. I'll look forward to seeing everybody next Wednesday night, May 25th, 2022, for my next live broadcast. Have a good evening, pura vida, and take care.